Yeah, that's the 20. There we go.
Okay, so we'll start our workshop at 7:03.
Ready to go? Hey, well, hello, commissioners. Thank you. And Jenny and Tracy, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with you once again. Actually, be here physically in person. Thank you so much. Yes, I know, real humans. I haven't had the opportunity to meet you yet, Commissioner Watts, but it's very nice to see you in person. And I did have the opportunity to meet Commissioner Bryan at the WPPA meeting recently, and then just met Commissioner Crowe. So wonderful to see you all. Just as a reminder, I'm Abby Russell. I am a communication specialist from Foster Olanji. I have been a public information officer for 12 years at the state level, and then have been in the private sector for almost 4 years, doing very much the same thing that I used to do for the state and for the Port of Vancouver. I'm just really, really happy to be here. Pass it over to my colleague, Sarah.
And I'm Sarah Seeloff, and it's nice to be with all of you and have a chance to meet you in 3D. So I'm a senior planner at Foster Olanji, and I have spent my career in the public sector and then the nonprofit sector before entering the private sector about a year ago. So my work involves a great deal of strategic planning, similar to this, kind of these broad-ranging conversations. What are we going to do? How are we going to set ourselves up to prioritize appropriately and achieve the port's goals and missions. So I spend a lot of time working with ports on things like that. And I also do a great deal of work with funding, which I understand is of interest. So yeah, really looking forward to seeing where these conversations take us, and great to be here.
Nice meeting you as well. And thanks for sitting through the first part of our meeting.
Oh, it's business, right?
Definitely.
No, it's business. So I think I'm kicking off with the agenda. Is that right? Okay.
Indeed, let's go.
So this, you already have this, it's the same as the agenda you have in your hands. But I just want to wrap it up a little bit, because it doesn't actually tell you what we're going to accomplish. So today, what we would like to do with you is establish a framework for developing the report that will come from this process and will hopefully inform your comp plan update. Hopefully you'll see in here in a minute, we're going to talk about timeline and what that kind of looks like. There's a bit of overlap with the budget process. And Jenny alluded to this earlier because I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but typically ports start their budget process maybe like July, August.
It's usually been, September, but I think you asked for it a month sooner, so probably August.
Okay, so there's a little bit of overlap, which may be a good thing because as we're going through this, we're going to talk about this in a minute, but I'm jumping ahead. Think about capital facilities planning. Think about budgeting, which you're always thinking about, but in the context of the comp plan update, these are great things to sort of walk alongside. So there will be a report at the end of this process that sort of brings together your input and the information that we've researched to help inform that comp plan update. Today, we also want to gather your input on community engagement. So thank you, Commissioner Bryan, for sort of teeing that up. And we want to hear from you. You have a draft communications and community engagement plan in your packet. That is an item that we want to discuss today and get your input on so that we may finalize that and begin to reach out to the community and involve them in this process. We want to talk about priorities. So you have priorities. There are priorities that we've been observing in your commission meetings and recent commission actions, and that we've talked with Jenny about, that we understand our priorities are sort of top of mind for you right now. We want to hear from you about that. And then also the SEDS list, which again, you have in your packet. So that's something that we also will reference a little bit and talk about those priorities. And we want to find a focus area. Where are we going to focus in these first couple of meetings to really kick this off? And some of that focus might be not necessarily the sort of hottest issues or the things that need to be addressed in a timely manner, though they might be. They also might be things that take time, right? There's something that's a little more complicated or requires more research. And so those are a couple of the lenses through which we're going to be looking at this process. Anything to add?
Not to that. I think that was, I guess is where we need to go.
Okay, wonderful.
You want to perhaps talk a little bit, maybe probably in the bond, this is a reminder about
Yeah.
the role of comp.
Yes,
schemes in the big picture.
I will. Comp schemes, so we've talked about this before, but they're kind of a funny animal. The only agency that has to do them in Washington is courts, public courts, and the term scheme is really outdated. They were, it's about a century old. But what it really means is the plan. What are you going to do with the public assets that you've been entrusted with? And these public dollars? And it helps to engage the community in those decisions, to get their input, but also to inform them of what the port plans to do with these assets and these financial assets that you have. It is very much a link to your community. And we're going to talk about this too, but it's a two-way street of communications and engagement where you're going out to the community and saying, hey, we're doing this. We want to hear from you. Talk to me in this, you know, if you're having coffee with somebody, you're in another meeting, you belong to other clubs and groups in the community. And they're also coming to you in public hearings or providing input via email. There's a lot of different ways and nexus that we can create through this process. It's a partnership with your community too, in a lot of ways. You've expressed a lot of interest in hearing from them, and I think this is a really great way to do that in a way that crystallizes what the port actually does, and there's an educational aspect to that for the community as well. The port operates in a big context, so you're the ADO, you're a countywide port essentially, right? And so you're county, so you're doing economic development that impacts people's lives across the county and really the region. I mean, that's how ports are. They're usually regional economic hubs. And there's a big ripple effect for what you do. It includes a lot of partners in the community. So you've already talked about some of those who participated in the SEDS discussion. There are many others that you work with regularly. Those folks are a different sort of set of stakeholders that are boots on the ground. And they're an important audience as well. And how this comp plan, when you do decide to update it, how that comp plan moves forward with those assets, it impacts everyone in the community. And I know you understand that, but it's always an important sort of framework, right, to keep in mind as we're moving forward. For all of those reasons and more, this is not a linear process. It won't be like, okay, we addressed this, and now we can move on to this, and now we can move on to this. There will probably be a lot of things that are happening at the same time. We're going to do our best to help keep it very organized and structured, maybe a little too structured sometimes. So hopefully you will pull us, back a little bit and say, oh, we need something different. This is a process to help inform you and for you to have a guide when you are done that says, how do we want to go about this? And this is the information that we needed to update the comp plan. Anything else?
Yeah, just to say that, I mean, as Abby mentioned, this is it's built on partnerships, right? And partnerships are full of negotiation, whether we're talking about negotiating household duties with the people with whom you live or negotiating economic development priorities with your community. And so that's kind of how I like to think about it, and just underscores your point, Abby, that this is not necessarily a check the box and move on, we're done. Glad we dealt with that, put it to the side kind of process, that there's going to be a lot of circling back and maybe leaving some questions open to resolve later down the line.
And the communications plan is also a living document. So what it is today, it might not be in 3 months, because you're like, oh, you know what, we heard from the community, this is really important, or there's something happening that we need to maybe use as a vehicle to get information to the community or pull information in. So just, keep that in mind, that we'll probably be coming back to stuff throughout this process.
Yeah.
So what is the timeline? Is this me or you? I forget.
I think you're going to talk about the
All right.
timeline, but I'm happy to chime in.
No, I'll pick it up. So as you're aware, the contracting and kickoff was kind of the end of last year. We came to your commission meeting in November. I can't believe it was November, to just say hello and kind of get things kicked off. And now here we are with communications and engagement planning. So we're in that process. The green diamonds is everybody here, are we okay with color? Because some of the colors are a little similar. You can see this.
Red is a little difficult for me.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So the green diamonds are sort of a milestone, right? So that's when we would expect to deliver a quote unquote final communications plan to you and to Jenny and Tracy, so that we may then begin to help support the outreach to the community. So that's just the planning portion. The community engagement portion goes throughout this process. So it's going to be from as soon as that plan is finalized to as soon as you have the report in your hands, and probably beyond that, frankly, because then you'll be looking at perhaps updating your comp plan, which has its own requirements. Commission workshops, we expect to come to you at least for the next 6 months, perhaps a little longer, but that is what's currently in the scope and budget. And then research and report development really begins as soon as we're done here
Mhm.
with this meeting, and we have some priorities. We'll start to dig into that and begin developing a report as we go. And the goal is to finish that in September.
This is actually a really good illustration of how, I mean, I know that we're talking about lines on a calendar, but to the point about this process being nonlinear, you can see that we've got 3 different layers of activity, at least overlapping for a substantial period of
And
time.
there's really more, honestly, and there's review processes and there's back and forth and, yeah, so there's a lot more to it, but those are the big ones.
Mhm.
Questions about that or comments?
Thank you.
All right, so a good starting place just to really ground ourselves and really set the tone is to review the mission and the goals. You're obviously very familiar with these. These came from the Port's existing comprehensive scheme of harbor improvements. And so there's a lot of words on this slide. Abby and I have tried to avoid dousing you in words. I'm not going to read every single one of these, right? But you can see that, you know, key words that jump out to me as I look at the mission, right? Maximizing public resources, jobs, infrastructure, economic vitality, and community. There's a lot going on. Ports are a unique beast, as we know. Washington State is home to something like 25% of the ports in the country. And so you're entrusted with a lot, and we're going to touch on this again, right? But it's from mission to margin and back again. So the goals that currently exist in the comp plan follow a couple of different focus areas, right? And those range from the first being economic development, that's taken from bullet number 1, to real estate, recreation, transportation, and then finally management, right? And so each of these goals are appropriately broad. It gives you a lot of room within which to maneuver. And these are really what we are, where we're starting from, right? As we think about helping prepare you as the port to progress down the road of making further updates to your comprehensive plan. Any comments or questions about that?
No, that was good.
Okay. So let's get into the meat of the matter and talk about communications.
Yes, so this is the point where I hope it will become a 2 or 3-way conversation with sort of, you know, brainstorming. The communications and engagement plan that was sent out in your packet, again, as a draft. It's something that we developed with a little bit of research and a little bit of discussion with Jenny to make sure that we were capturing audiences accurately and thinking about existing tools. And thinking about this process and how the port wants to engage with its community. You'll notice that there's a lot of, you know, technical sections in here, but a couple of things about this plan. Goals here are to provide a framework for 2-way communications. So it's going to look different. To provide meaningful involvement for the community. So it's not just like, you know, and not that you do this, but, you know, sometimes the attitude or the belief of the community or the public can be just like, oh, they're not really listening, right? We're just gonna go and, you know, say our comments at the public hearing and that's the end of it, you know? But no, to help people understand what you're doing and why it's important. And that's part of the education piece. To help them understand how they can participate in ways that match their priorities and their concerns for the port and the community. And then to find ways that resonate with them to connect, right? So not just saying, well, you got to come to this open house, but to go to them as well, right? Places in the community where you can, every community is different, but I used to work for the State Department of Transportation. And I had large communities and I had small communities in my region. And one of the smaller communities had a grocery store that was smack dab in the middle of this neighborhood that we were going to be impacting with this project. And the best way to get information in that community was totally old school. So this was like 10 years ago, let's say 10 years ago. Bulletin boards with the little tab that you could pull that had a website where people could go to that website and be like, oh, and it was in English and Spanish because there was a very high percentage of Spanish speaking population there. So that was the way that you got to people, was the local grocery store. So that's one way. Another way is existing tools. You have newsletters, e-newsletters, you have your website, a number of existing tools. Mailers has been something that Jenny's talked about. We're not scoped and budgeted in this process to do a mailer, but that, you know the tools that work for your community. So we're going to talk about that.
Can I just butt in there and
Please.
just say that meaningful involvement are 2 magic words that I see come up all the time in funding applications. So this is yet another reason why, as you're developing this big governing document, Almost every state and federal grant guidelines that I see coming out wants to know, how did you engage your community meaningfully in the planning process? And sometimes, especially if you're going after a construction grant for transportation, right? The agency wants to know, well, how'd you do that in the planning process? We're not funding you for planning, but tell us how on the road to getting here, you have meaningfully involved the community. And so just to say that I know ports are economic development engines, going out and getting grants is part of what you do. So just to highlight that it's a good thing to do. We do it for all kinds of reasons, including because it can quite literally pay off.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt, for sure. The other sort of leg of this stool is that when you meaningfully involve people and you really take note of their input, and like you did tonight, when you heard concerns from the community and you took note of that and you incorporated it by taking action to, address some of those concerns in the resolution, reflecting that back to the community is a way that you show that their input was meaningful to you and that you listened. And that's really important, because you don't always get that from a public agency. You feel like your comments just go into this like black hole and you never hear, and maybe it got incorporated, maybe it didn't, you don't know. And so that's another piece of this that's really important, is making sure that we're reflecting back. Oh, I talked to so-and-so and this is what I heard. And so this is what we're gonna, how we're gonna move forward. Gonna stop there, because this is the part where we want to hear from you. Thoughts on the community engagement plan, changes, other venues. What do you think about it, and what stood out to you?
Well, first of all of this is really, really good information. I was very impressed with this plan and the ideas that were brought forth in it. And very pleased with the idea of, maximizing the community involvement and reaching out to them. All the ideas that you suggested as far as, the outreach methods, I think will work really well. I do think a mailer might be beneficial. We have to see what we have in our.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure we can do it. If we want to do, we just can't do too many.
Right.
And we'd have to decide what was the end, what are we inviting people to?
Mhm.
Because we have so many workshops. Are we sending one out that says, these are the dates of the workshops, or that would just have to be sorted out? But yeah, we could do another one. It takes time to get them printed and mailed, but we can do it.
Right.
We can afford to pay for one if we need to.
But I think that one mailer throughout the process would be really good to reach every household and business. And I know that I used that method when I was running for election, and I know it was very effective and it worked really well and it reached a lot of people. So we wouldn't leave anybody out that doesn't have, computer access. I know we're an older community, and a lot of people just don't use that method.
Yeah,
So I want to make sure that we're not forgetting them.
thank you. That's great.
Flyers is another thing. One of the things I found additionally when I was running to this position is finding out what people want is going to them at their comfort zone.
Yes.
So they're honest at their house. They're honest where they're comfortable. So having the ability to have either a flyer or some information to back up what those conversations say would be an excellent plan. It just in how I work in that, because I would go out and talk to people and say, hey, this is kind of what we're thinking. What are your thoughts? What are your priorities? Those type of things, and having that ability over the next few months for sure, getting out and kind of pounding the sidewalk, and having that engagement, meaningful engagement, like you talked about. So that's where I found a lot of the honesties. A lot of people, they come to a big group or they sit here, they'll listen, they'll talk, and you'll have the ones that are comfortable talking. But I want to hear about the people that are silent majority also. And so I think that's a valuable avenue is to get out to those one-on-ones with those individuals.
Thank you, Commissioner. Can you tell me, can you elaborate a little bit on that? I'm interested in where you reach people. I mean, you can knock on doors, right? You can have conversations, in your daily sort of life in your community, but where might you reach folks? So for example, Lions clubs, those are great places. Rotary is another really good. Rotary is always, pretty much every Rotary I've ever known is looking for presenters all the time. So what are some other ways here in Dayton that you think would be effective?
Well, you hit those clubs like that. You could have town hall type stuff. For some of those, you could just be simply, like I said, knowing people, going to making appointments with them, showing up at the door. Hey, I got about 10 minutes, 15 minutes. So I would say the book is open on all of what I'm talking about, for that matter. But yeah, you go up to, where you have congregate living types of facilities, where you have a captive audience, where you can have those conversations and getting out there and either commissioners or what have you on those journeys and saying, hey, this is what we want to do. What's your thoughts on it? You lived here for 85 years. What do you want to see? Type deal. So,
Great.
yep.
Thank you. Do you have, I assume, is there a fair here in Dayton? Yeah, okay,
Yep.
so not just the Walla Walla Fair here in
Yeah,
Dayton.
yeah, that's our ribbon from the last fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's also events.
Yes, it is.
There's also events that come on. You
Okay.
can have
Chamber,
booth.
right?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Wheels weekend, you got, rodeos, you got fairs, you got, all kinds of other events that come along that if you wanted to have an opportunity to be in front of folks where they
Right.
can come to you, that's another opportunity for that.
That's a great point.
Excellent.
Especially since this would be stretching through the summer, I imagine,
That's
is that
right.
kind of season.
The
for
event
those.
season's coming up, so I mean, might be an opportunity. I'm not saying you'll hit all of them, in availability, but, definitely be something that, how can we add value to that, with our process? Or how's that add value to our process?
Yeah, both, really. Are there ag events? Just wait here.
There's the fair, they do stuff this time of year, but they're like weed board and, no, oh, I thought she meant like the ag groups.
Oh.
Which do you mean? I'm sorry,
Either.
maybe I misunderstood.
No, yeah, I mean, so
Oh,
just,
All of them.
that's a huge community here and a huge priority, I think, for everybody,
Trying
so.
to think of a
Yeah.
gathering at the end of May, that Dayton Days is no longer.
There is
a big
Dayton
draw.
days, but it's not, yeah, there is Dayton days, yeah.
Mhm.
I think that he said rodeo, so I think that's what he probably meant, yeah.
What is the cattleman's dinner thing that they?
There is a cattleman's dinner, yeah, in the winter, I think,
It's in February
Oh,
this
is
year.
February,
Mhm.
okay.
But I don't know, is that open to, I don't even know what it is.
I think it's just cattleman, but always open to other people. Oh,
Yeah. Cattleman's dinner is no. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
And even if it's, so right at the start of this, you may not have a lot of bells and whistles to present people, right? So we're developing this, but even if you were to get out and say, hey, this is what we are doing.
Right.
If you have any thought and want to be engaged in this, let us know what they are.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Funnel them our way
Yeah.
so that when we are developing the more robust information to get out to people, we're capturing that along the way. So even it could be a 5-minute stand-up conversation in front of these areas and say, hey, we're in the middle of our comp plan right now. Here's some things that we're looking at.
Mhm.
We are interested in your suggestions. They don't have to be ours on this list either. They can be yours. That's what we want.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there, that a lot of this is going to be just letting the public know what we are doing, why we're doing it, and giving them the opportunity to be involved.
It's stupendously unsexy. I'll just say it, because Sarah and I both have a lot of experience communicating and working through really unsexy processes. And the part that gets people is we want your opinion, right? We want to hear from you because XYZ reasons that this process is important to them. And it's a full circle back to that education piece.
Absolutely.
Have the website,
Mhm.
that information through the process.
The website, so this is how I've always done public comms, since I was a wee little PIO in my first days learning on the job. The website is your hub. That's where you push people, right? But we don't think of it as an external, like, nobody's gonna look for this information necessarily on the website, but we are going to push them to the website. That's where it lives. They can look at the comp plan. They can look at all the paperwork from this process, if that's something that, you want to point them to, like commission packets. They can figure out, here's an email, if it's an info@Port of Columbia to send in your comments. Here's the commission schedule, so you can come to a commission meeting and a workshop and hear it. That's where it all lives, and you push everybody to that so that they can get the information.
Perfect.
Web first is what we call it.
Commissioner Crowe?
So I struggle with trying to imagine how to engage the community. We have had projects that the port has proposed to the community and they do not come. And they claim that, they never knew about proposed projects.
Right.
So how do you get them to come to your meetings?
It's so hard. If I had the answer, I would write a book and then we could be rich. I will tell you that with some projects, well, it's getting harder and harder to catch people's attention, to your point. There have been lots of studies that say that our attention spans are those of the goldfish now. It's that
Oh
bad.
my goodness.
We're on the level with the goldfish. Isn't that something?
Yeah.
And so it's hard to catch people's attention. So I think there's really three things that we can do. We can plan well, we can understand how to get in front of people in places that resonate with them, where they feel comfortable. We do everything we can, humanly possible, and within a process like this, to communicate clearly and often and early, and give them the resources, and then best work with what we've got.
Mhm.
And we're always going to have people say, I didn't know about this, because you can't get to everybody, to your point.
Right.
One of the other things, and this is not my favorite thing about public communications, but as we plan, as we reach out, as we talk to people, as we document it as part of this process, we can then go back and say, but we told you. You sometimes have to do that. You have to have that backstop. And that's why this process is so important to the overarching update.
Mhm. Yeah. I was thinking of the broadband meeting that we're hoping to have at the end of January. Food does bring people in.
It sure does.
And you have it set for 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
And, I don't know that we have a budget for that, but,
Okay, I will think about it. I have done many a public meeting on pretty small dollars.
Yes.
So, okay, I will think about it. You're right. Yeah, I guess the one input I would like to give, even though this is more about there, but I have to tell you, after doing this for 20 years, it is really difficult to do surveys, public meetings, workshops, have an email address that people can send comments to, and then get to the decision time and have, people say, I didn't know about it. You're not listening to me. That is a big struggle, because there has to be two-way.
Right.
There has to be, but I'm not the expert. I want to hear what you think, but that is a big struggle. And then also for me personally, in trying to answer people's concerns, I then get called names and a bully. And so it's a real balancing act on inviting input and then having people be real about whether or not they were engaged and whether or not they really want to hear what we know.
Yeah,
I mean,
so,
we saw that tonight.
Yeah.
There was comments made at the end out here that were out of pocket
right,
about us that we did not do.
Yeah.
It'll feed into it. We hear you. Okay, fine. When you're gonna have that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so.
you're not alone, I'll say. I don't know if that makes you feel better, but.
Well, no, and I'm not
It's
trying to be whiny.
No,
That is
not at
not,
all.
I am not whining.
Not at
I want to do the right thing.
Right.
So it's very difficult when you think you're trying and then you
Yes,
just
and
get
then you get the
blasted.
Yeah. So, boy,
Anyway,
Well,
it's just something to.
a couple-
I would like us to all understand at what level we accept that we've done our best.
Yeah.
And then we move forward, I guess is what I'm thinking.
a couple of things that kind of help inoculate us is the reflection of feedback to the community. So, and again, attention span for goldfish, right? So we have to, and I'm speaking of myself as well, we have to continually show So every workshop we can say, oh, this is what we did for community engagement. This is what we heard. Every single workshop you come back and you make sure that's a part of your communication during that workshop. The commissioners, I think it's really important that they say, oh, I went to Rotary and this is, I talked to 10 people and this is what I heard. It's a little bit cumbersome, but it helps to demonstrate in very visual ways what you're hearing. And then if any of that is actually incorporated, reflecting that as well. So again, we just have to keep coming back to it.
Right.
And it's still not gonna change that we will have people that say, well, I didn't know.
Or sometimes if you can't incorporate feedback, sharing
Yes.
why you.
Mhm.
Exactly,
Right.
yeah, thank you. That's a
Mhm.
great point. Yeah, sometimes that's even more educational to folks. It's like, oh, I didn't know that the court couldn't do that by
Mm.
law. Or didn't know that it required X, Y, and Z, and so we can't change that now, but maybe next year. Right? Great.
What do you do about, communication if you're, doing something that's unpopular, but it needs to be done? And one example I will give, which really isn't us, well, kind of, but like raising sewer rates or raising water rates. I mean, nobody wants to raise sewer rates,
Yeah.
but sometimes it has to be done. And the people that are here at the table are the ones that have been studying it and have the knowledge and know it needs to be done,
Mhm.
but it's not popular.
So we just helped the Port of Anacortes, which is another client of ours, communicate their marina rate increase. And I don't know how closely you follow the Port of Anacortes. They're wonderful folks, by the way, just a really great crew. It did not go over well. But it needed to be done, right? Because they had all of these capital improvements that they had been doing and funding and great stuff for the marina. Their rates were below market value, so they needed to bring them up because that is important. You can't be undercutting. All of the things that they were supposed to do, they did. They still had a group of folks come and really make things hard on them, even though they communicated it through all of the same channels that they usually do. They stayed the course, right? They continued to share information. They met with folks one-on-one to make sure they had that information directly, so it wasn't like in a public meeting where they didn't feel like they could comment, to your point, right? And they had kind of a bit of a climb. I mean, it was hard, and it's still, every once in a while it comes back. And somebody will come and kind of stir the pot a little bit, and they just sort of have to say, thank you, we appreciate your comments, this was the policy that we set. If you have questions, please talk to the staff. And sometimes that's all you can do, because people, unfortunately, I find that in the years that I've been a public servant and now doing what I do for the public sector, serving folks like you, our level of civility has gone down tremendously. And that's part of it, is that folks unfortunately can't just say, well, I guess they really did do the best they could. Some people can't swallow that. So we will probably get some of that.
And level of trust.
Mhm.
Has gone in a different direction as well.
And we understand why as citizens. We understand that. And unfortunately, it just has impacts across the board. Okay. Fun times communications. Why did I choose this field, or did it choose me? I don't know. But no, when it goes well, though, it is so rewarding to hear people say, man, like, that was a really great process. Or, so let's hope for that, prepare for what we probably the reality, but we will do everything we can in our power to get out to folks.
Yeah, and I do, it's not like it's all bad,
No.
like right now, people are so excited about broadband, so I get positive feedback on that, so.
Well, and here's another strategy, I give away all my secrets, but tying things like this to things people are excited about can sometimes bring in that attention span. So that's another tactic.
I was thinking we should probably have something to hand out at the broadband meeting
Yeah.
that we're gonna have on the 26th. That would be
Yeah.
the time to hand stuff out, right?
We've got
I mean,
the-
about this.
Yeah, we've
about
got
this.
a informational
That's great.
handout and
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, so just one last call before we move away from the community engagement plan. Are there any other changes or additions that you would like to see to this plan before we finalize it, knowing it's a living document?
I thought it was wonderful. I loved it.
Yeah, I think you've included, as we've talked, all of the audiences that we're hoping to address or to bring the information to and hopefully get input from.
Right, yeah, and Jenny helped a great deal with that. I mean, we sort of understand generally how communities work and who needs to be reached, but insights from all of you are very important. Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. So what we have here, talking about priorities, are two lists. And this is intended to give us a launch point from which to engage in further conversation. And as Abby prefaced earlier, really start figuring out, okay, we eat the apple one bite at a time. What's the next bite, right? For when we see you in February. On the left, you'll see a list of port priorities. This is not legally binding. It's not formal. It is simply, like Abby said, what we have gleaned from recent commission actions and from listening to discussions and conversations with port staff.
And the little sticky note I was keeping as we went through of things you guys were interested in. So that's where some of that stuff came from, like
Absolutely.
downtown and housing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the first four, right, are existing assets. And then we've got some bigger, like 5 kind of bigger areas, right? And maybe these are areas for exploration and education where the commission needs information. Maybe there are certain goals that might be attached to those, but that's what we've got for starters. And then on the right, we have the 2022 Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy and Community Priorities. These were what were voted on in December. So you'll see the number of votes that each received in orange off to the left, and we cut off the list at anything that got 5 or more votes, right? So there were several that got received fewer. And so these two lists in many ways talk to each other, intersect with each other. Abby, what else would you mention about these? And I'll hand it over to you to go forward.
Yeah, thank you. No, I think it's important to view these through, and this is the end of maybe the consultants talking, and then we want to hear from you, but I think that there's a couple of lenses that we touched on earlier. So the needs of the port and the needs of the community, right? And the timing around those, which y'all would know much, much better than we. And then giving us all time to do justice to those issues, right? So let's say that buying the downtown building is something that maybe isn't as high a priority, but it needs some research. You need a lot of information, or there's needs there. That might be something we actually focus on a little earlier to drill down and start working on that while we're doing some other things. Again, that non-linear approach. So that's how I would recommend we look at this. And then also recognizing the crossover between the community's interests, or the SEDS list on the right, and at least the priorities we have here. There's probably others in your brains.
And maybe before we stop talking.
Yes.
I'm gonna go forward and then I'm gonna go back.
Yeah.
So we talked earlier about the broad mandate of ports being the unique beasts that they are. And so this is a graphic that we like to use that actually comes out of the ports manual that Abby had a major role in producing. And it's mission versus margin, right? That yes, you as the port exist to spark economic development and create jobs. And at the same time, you exist to improve quality of life in your community. And we see that in the port's mission that we showed you earlier. So this is breaks everything up into quadrants, right? It kind of helps us think about, based on the mission and the margin attached to certain priorities, where they might fall, right?
It's a tool, right? So as you're talking through some of these priorities and thinking like, is this something that's going to bring revenue to the port? Yes, but does it have community benefit? Not really. Maybe that's a resource creator. Maybe that's something that, can help us create more opportunities, but it isn't necessarily a top priority. Maybe, depends. Is this something that has huge community benefit, but we don't know, maybe we'll break even, maybe we'll lose money. Boy, that might be, we might be real careful with that one. So it's a great tool to reference, and it helps us get unstuck, right? So we're like, this is really cool and I really want to do it, but it's going to cost a lot of money. Where does it fall?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to go back.
The only thing I would say is, and I don't know if the gentleman and lady agree with me, but my thought has always been that ports exist to do things that don't always make market sense. And some of the things we do end up being really financially benefit, and some things end up being more of the community benefit, but they're break even. I mean, an example I'll give are parks. We all know parks don't make any money, but cities and counties have parks.
Right.
Ports have marinas.
Yeah.
Which also don't usually make money.
Yeah.
Let's just be
So
honest.
I just want to throw that caveat in there that yes, that's a great guide. Don't forget the I mean, if it's always benefits the community and makes money, then the private sector is probably gonna do it. And
There's
so
a-
sometimes we need to
Such
do
a great
things that are,
point.
yeah,
There's a lot of nuance here,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And to your point, part of the reason that ports are such a big thing in Washington state is because your powers are enormous
Mhm.
for a public agency, and there are not many public agencies that can do what you do, which is to split that line or walk that fine line between entrepreneurial thinking and investment and public benefit. So
I think that it's a great point, and one example I'll give that I just finished working on was a feasibility study for a port, a marine port. Around fresh fish and seafood markets, right? Basically, they had been hearing from the community for some time that, this was a seaside community and it would be great to be able to go down to the dock and buy right off the boats, right? But it's kind of hard, right? Because the people who are bringing in the fish and the crab aren't always there on the basis. So it was very hit or miss. And so they asked us, how much sense does this make, right? I mean, where does it fall on this spectrum? And so we did the research and came up with a financial model. And, the short answer was, well, in terms of mission, it's totally far off on the end, right? Fabulous community benefit. That's great. In terms of margin, you need to play around with the variables. You need to think about how often you're willing to do this. What are you going to charge the fishers? How many people are you going to have involved, right? And so it's really about, to your point about, we just need more information sometimes, right? I mean, that's going to be a multi-step process for them. What we did was the first bite at the apple. But again, a good example of where I think these tools can be useful. So I want to come back to this and really open it up. We want to stop talking and we want to ask you a variety of questions. I mean, is the list of port priorities complete for now, right? We can always amend it. Are there things that you think are missing? Are there things that you would change? Are there things that you would add? And how does the list of community priorities strike you? How do those two talk to each other? What patterns stand out to you? What else would you throw into the pot?
beyond the sort of gray area of, community priorities and port priorities sort of having some alignment, in some quarters, there's also a black and white part to this, which is oftentimes if you're going after grant funds, they'll ask you, or they'll want to understand the connection between community economic priorities and port priorities.
Yeah.
So just thinking about that as well. We have a saying at MFA, begin with the end in mind.
Mhm.
The end is usually we need money to fund the great things we want to do. So we just wanted to put that out there as another point to consider as you're looking at this list.
That is an excellent point. Often when I'm writing grant applications, there is usually a section that, for lack of a better expression, could just be titled, "Prove to us you didn't make this stuff up."
Yeah.
How is this rooted in community priorities? That's a great point.
I appreciate Jenny's comment on some projects may not have, as far as cash community benefit, it just might be, the number one for the SEDS was, a Parks and Rec district. So it's the well-being. So yes, it does have value, but it doesn't have a dollar value on it. So how you're going to tie that as the first priority, how to attach it to something over on the left side.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out how one goes about doing that.
It's a great point, Commissioner. One thing I'll just say I've seen several ports wrestle with is the issue of workforce, right? I mean, this is a huge issue in so many places. And I've definitely seen things like parks, housing, and childcare arise as a workforce development issue. How are we going to keep people in our community? How are we going to attract them?
Good point.
Well, and I think it's like, some of them are projects, like, housing, well, let me think. So housing's a project, but it feeds economic development tremendously. If you don't have a place for people to live that is affordable, then you don't have anybody to work in your businesses.
Yeah.
And I think some of the things on the right side would be more like quality of life issues, but they affect ability to do economic development and attract businesses.
And what the port does for economic development also provides for that quality of life. There's a
Right.
huge
It's,
crossover.
yeah.
Here's an example, perhaps, Lions Ferry Marina, right? that is a recreational area.
Yeah.
And so while it doesn't have a direct tie to forming a Parks and Rec district, there is definitely recreational overlap
Mhm.
with assets that you own.
Mm. And a good example of, you know, having more input is better from the community because that very first one up there, depending how you put it, it's the number one out of this small group, but it overwhelmingly just got voted down in the community.
You heard about that? Yeah.
So, you know, so you look at this and go, well, it's number one out of that small group, but if the community as a whole, they just voted it down. So is it truly the community or is it the small group? So those are the reasons why we need to get out and talk to those other folks, and communicate, you know, maybe there's communication along with that, and some of it might be broken up.
Mhm.
Most everybody will agree they want a pool,
Sure.
Mhm.
not it, most people do not want that other part of that,
Oh, understood. Well, I was gonna ask you, why did it get voted down?
that other part
Because-
of it.
So this is like a school levy. Oftentimes what you'll see is they'll have like a maintenance levy, but it's also, they have another thing tied in or legislative, you see it in legislature all the time where they tack on stuff and they're like, nope. So if there was something tacked on, then that can explain what happened there.
Well, and I don't know this for a fact, but seems like people really want a pool.
Oh, yeah.
They do.
Oh, that's not the argument, yeah.
But for people that are working on the pool want, as you two heard at the meeting, they're like, okay, well, how are we gonna do this then? I mean, they want help.
Mhm.
So I think being on this list is, are we, well, because not everything that the community wants is the port's business,
Right.
not always.
Oh, yeah.
You know, broadband, you know, I resisted it for years, but we're doing it. It's port's business now. But what, I guess I need to ask you this, is that what we're trying to do, is figure out what's the port's business? How does it feed in? How could we participate? What decisions we make? Because we can put our power behind something like broadband and we're getting it done. So it's kind of deciding what we're gonna help put our power and our ability and our behind. And just because people didn't want the Parks and Rec district, doesn't mean they didn't want the pool. So isn't it more about, is it more nuanced to that now? And how do we get to that then? How do we get to a pool? Right? Is that,
I'll give you my perspective, Sarah. I'm sure you have some thoughts on this as well. Back to your point of how do we do hard things, right? The things that we know need done and the community doesn't want, or vice versa, right? Things that the community wants that maybe we can't do. Both of those things are true. The port probably should not be in the business. I won't speak for you, but I'm guessing of putting in a pool.
right, and I'm not proposing that.
Right, no,
I'm not proposing that.
Not saying you are,
Yeah.
but for example. But to the point of understanding the connection between these, I think it's important to see what is on the SEDS list, because that's what we have right now, right? Is the SEDS list, and it's pretty fresh from December. To understand where many of the economic development folks in the community are, where their heads are right now, right? And then think about your priorities and, you know, how, maybe it's not a pool, but understanding that recreation is important to the community is important to you. Mixed use housing, that's obviously a tie into something that you are thinking about. Childcare, that gets back to the workforce issue, right? As a parent with 2 young children, I can tell you without good quality childcare, I would not be sitting here right now. There's a lot of tie-in to that economic piece with something like childcare. Rock Hill, direct, broadband, direct, wastewater treatment plant upgrades, interesting.
And we
It's an
need one,
infrastructure.
but it's really not the ports yet.
No,
It's
but
more
it's-
supporting the city.
It's
Yeah.
an infrastructure issue, and if businesses don't have the wastewater treatment they need, don't have capacity, they will not come here,
Mhm.
right? So there's all these things that just tie in to different things.
Just like the conversation we had with our, what we're trying to get, if we had a better
Right.
list, and, you know, if we had those avenues that they, so.
Yes.
Exactly the same thing.
Yeah, no, I think Abby, those are all excellent points. I mean, one thing I'll highlight is I've heard workforce come up. Now granted, I think it's come out of our mouths, but it feels like maybe that's another priority. I don't know, something to think about, but
I mentioned it quite a few times tonight because I'm hearing it's from businesses so much. They're just desperate.
thank you.
Right.
They're desperate.
Yeah,
It's
I see it
everywhere
too.
too.
Yeah.
How do we solve that problem of, you know, the business success is dependent on having a quality workforce.
Right.
And
So,
places for them to live and.
right,
Well, a good example, I go to the west side on a regular basis on the east side.
Mhm.
I can't go to a fast food restaurant over there indoors. They're closed
Yeah.
because they don't have staff to run them.
Mhm.
And I'm like, you got 4 million people in a mile area here and you have nobody that
It
can
is
run them?
very strange.
It is strange.
Well, yeah, we talked about it earlier and I don't want to get into it now, but it might be something we need to explore, because I've heard economists' descriptions, multifaceted. It has to do with baby boomers and healthcare being ginormous and
Yeah.
Yeah, I talked to
birth
one,
rate lower than our death rate and all these things.
and something just can't run it. Like with, paying minimum wage at 20 some bucks an
Yeah.
hour during some mom and pops. A lot of them I talk to over there, they're like, we just can't do it anymore. We can't pay employees for that.
yeah, the minimum wage in Seattle is just ridiculous, it's so much more than anywhere else in the region, and how can they do it?
It's 15.74 here now too, yeah.
That's hot.
It is high, and so those.
But it's a living wage, so it's like, what do we do? Yeah,
Yeah.
anyway.
Much
Or it's not a living wage, but they're trying to get closer. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. Sorry. Stay, put it on recording.
It could be that, maybe workforce is something that just requires more understanding and more research. I was going to say housing, right, is something that I spend a lot of time talking and thinking about. And it's really kind of unclear, right? What is the relationship of ports to housing? There are a lot of ports all around. I have talked with ports around the state who are trying to figure out what is the nexus with housing, because it's not really something that ports do, but there's an obvious workforce component and you can't get to economic development without going through housing. And so perhaps housing and workforce are in that same bucket of, we're not going to solve them by the end of this process, right? But
Right.
maybe by the time that we get to September, you could have a better articulated agenda for learning about and considering housing, right? Because again, our goal is not to push you to a point in September where we say, well, it's great that we solved all the problems in Columbia County and now we can all go home.
Right.
It's really to give you a springboard. We are building you a collective springboard. So just maybe some additional thoughts to keep in mind there, or with future funding opportunities, right? What does that look like? What does, if the wastewater treatment plant is not a port concern, but it's a city concern, and it obviously, the shadow of that need crosses into your area, which it obviously does. Is there some way that you could partner around future funding opportunities sometimes? Because I do this a lot. I am actually doing it this week.
Ad nauseum.
I write grants because local communities don't have the bodies to do it. And also there's something to be said for just seeing grants ad nauseum so that you kind of know what the trends are and how to respond. So is there some sort of, is that a partnership, right? Does the port talk with the city about, hey, how do we pull down a couple of $1,000 to get somebody to write this grant, right?
Yeah.
Those are some thoughts. So just to say that there are a lot of really concrete things on this list, but this comprehensive scheme updating process is really for you. And if what works for you is saying, we really need to understand that thing better, or we need to understand if that thing belongs on the priorities list, that's completely legitimate and a great use of the process.
So are you thinking like under economic development, which right now is very general,
Right.
that maybe workforce would be an
Could be.
element of it or something like that, or because it's such a feeder of that? I don't know. I guess I don't.
Yeah, here's an example. So this is your comp scheme, your comp plan. In the real estate section, it says explore feasibility of constructing XYZ, right? Analyze lease rates. Those are, it drills down to those tactics where you can identify, say with workforce, right? We need to understand better XYZ. We need to, with wastewater, we need to understand what the options are for funding and partnership or expansion. And that could be a tactic in your comp plan. But this process hopefully is to help you identify.
So you'd like to know what things from the right side would maybe be more moved to the priority list for researching. Is that what you're thinking? Asking?
I mean, that's part of it. I think the broader question is just, what should the list on the left look like. It might draw from the list on the right.
Mhm.
It might pull in, I mean, workforce is not anywhere on this chart
I see.
specifically,
Well, and
but
broadband isn't either, not on the
Yeah.
left.
It's
that's a
not-
great point.
Yeah,
It's in our
It's
comp plan, but it's
not.
not,
it is.
it's vague, it's under, yeah, okay.
You could argue it's a much bigger priority now than it was.
It
when
is,
this was
yeah.
written. And so it's a tactic, maybe it needs to be pulled up.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
So we have about 4 minutes, I think.
Oh my goodness.
That went quick.
Yeah.
Great conversation. Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
We have a lot of things, good things to look
Yeah.
at here.
Would like to see if we can maybe identify a couple of priorities for our next workshop. So what we'd like to do is just hear from you. If there are a couple that really stand out and you want to dig into those more, we'll start that process with what we've heard today, but then come back and really dig into it next time.
Are you saying of the priorities that you had listed? Or
Or
others?
other priorities that strike the commission and the staff is.
And could you pull that one back?
Yeah.
And just so you know, like I said on the left, like I knew that housing was. Is something we've talked about,
Right.
buying a building downtown. That's where that list came from, is our existing stuff plus the things I've heard from you.
Right.
So it can be from that list or it can be more, like she said, the workforce or whatever. So
Right.
it's up to you guys.
Right.
And the last thing I would chip in, and this is something Abby said earlier, is that, you know, if there's something that is particularly nebulous, but there's agreement that it's important, it may make sense to start picking away at that
Mhm.
sooner rather than later, just so we're not in the summer and then saying like, okay, now in 2 months, we're going to solve housing.
Go.
Right. So I believe housing is high priority. However, once you have housing, you have to bring people in. And the community has to be vibrant to want to come in. Currently, we don't have the daycare. Currently, we don't have a lot of jobs available for anyone who's coming here. We have broadband coming, so I think that could be a draw. And there are so many people who are working remotely now. But I'm trying to figure out how housing can be a even though I think it is a priority. Don't get me wrong. What is bringing people to Dayton? What can attract people to come to Dayton?
We have when you say we don't have jobs, we have jobs that are going unfilled,
Well,
lots of them. So that's an interesting statement.
okay, but we don't have the daycare. I mean,
Oh, right,
You know,
they can't work,
okay, yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I'm getting
Okay.
at.
but we have jobs that are going unfilled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So it's almost like, yeah, trying to palm a greased basketball in a sense, right? Like what can be done to attract people here? But I think it's a good broad question.
Right, yeah. Our downtown is not what it was 12 years ago when I came here. We have lost a lot of businesses and some because of workforce. I mean, for heaven's sakes, we had a restaurant that tried to open, but they couldn't find people to help them.
Wow.
And so the workforce is very important.
Workforce, housing, and sort of that attracting people to the community, all kind of tie together.
Yes.
Not quite sure what to call it, but I feel like that's one bucket of stuff that's gonna be, we're gonna need to untangle some of that, and that's a longer term one.
Yeah.
Is there a priority or two, and which I think we need, to your point, Commissioner, to start on that? I also know, we understand, that there are priorities that are very pressing for the commission and the court right now too. So we have sort of a complicated one that needs some untangling and some thought, and some research. But we also have some, I think, priorities that you're working on now. Are there some that need attention soon? And knowing that the end result is this report that's down the road, because like the railroad, right? That's a short term. That's a little bit more short term, right? Like you do need more information, I think. It sounds like that's what I'm hearing, but there's also a short term path that you're taking. So, but that's still a priority in your minds.
Yeah, I would say the railroad definitely is one of them, to figure out, what the best thing for the community is for that. Whether it's the port continuing to try to band-aid it together to have a minimal operation, or to whether or not to take a look at it and see if the private sector would be able to bring in better economic development because of the tools and the know-how that they want with the process. So I don't know where we're at with that. I don't know what that looks like, but I definitely want more information about it. and see where it needs to be. I'm not interested in hanging on to something just to hang on to something, but I'm also not interested in just throwing something to the side either, but I need more information to be able to make those decisions.
Mhm. Well, yeah, because we're supposed to take our assets and use them to the best and highest, ability, and so, we kind of need to look at that and make sure that, yeah, is this really the best use of this asset in the community? Or would it be better in the private sector? So I think addressing that in the beginning is a high priority. Also, I think that the Blue Mountain Station, because we have businesses wanting to move in there, how are we going to grow that? How are we going to make that property successful and desirable and want to engage with it and will really be involved with it? Because, as it is now, the traffic is slow. It doesn't get a lot of drive-by traffic or foot traffic in there, and so we really need to kind of look and see, what's the long-term direction of that? Are we going to use part of it for housing? Are we going to look at building another building, starting in the near future? I would really like to see us build some warehouse, especially along that siding that we had put in there, because then it gives us the ability for shipping, receiving, different things like that. So maybe looking at the Blue Mountain Station and what direction that the community is going to want to take that and where we're going to go. And the housing, that's really important, I think, because we just don't have the inventory here of mixed use housing. We don't have low income housing, we don't have middle income housing, and we don't have high income housing. There's just no inventory for anybody to really come in and settle and bring a family. So, family type housing is going to be really important for us to figure out if there is a role that we can play in that. And if there is, if we can use the properties that we have and how that looks. So,
Which is interesting, because there's not near the jobs there used to be.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
when
how
you
is the
had the
housing?
Green
Well,
China, when you had all, Woodstock, you had all of these employers with more people. There wasn't more houses back then, so.
Right, and I don't know this to be a fact, but I will tell you what I've been told, and this can be part of our exploration. Is that there are fewer people living in the houses, these big houses, in the
Yeah.
big historic houses with all the bedrooms. It used to be a family with 6 or 7 kids, and now it's maybe a retired couple. Or, it's just less, because that was my question, is like, why do we have a shortage?
Right.
Because you're exactly right, we don't have less houses,
I also
but
thought
it's
about
fewer people living in them.
did people board when they were when they had seasonal workers? Did a lot of people board?
They had some
Yeah.
seasonal housing, low income type seasonal housing.
And those are vacant.
But I remember, coming up as a kid and my family had some businesses downtown. It was vibrant. I mean, but like I said,
Yes.
we didn't lose a bunch of housing somewhere. We just lost people.
Interesting.
And we lost the economics that attracted those families. So we have retired folks.
Sure.
So with the point of, what can we do? Manufacturing, warehouse, if we had something like that back again,
Sure.
could it fuel the housing and could it fuel some of the other avenues with that? So I think they're hand in hand. Which one comes first? I don't have a magic, I don't have a magic cube for that, but I think they are hand in hand. And you build, like they say, you build it, they'll come.
It
So-
feels like we've circled back around, Commissioner Crowe, to your initial
Right,
point, right?
What comes first?
Right, right.
Yeah.
And Jenny, to your point, I mean, yes, you're absolutely right that there are national, every community has its own nuances, but you're absolutely correct that, we're seeing larger demographic trends, right? That the US population as a whole is getting older, particularly in smaller towns and rural areas, right? The average size of families is going down. So.
Yeah, and then back to housing too, when my mom was aging, she would have loved a small place to live. Didn't need to be low income, but a small place to live where somebody else mowed the lawn.
Other housing.
Maybe no.
And then her house, her 3-bedroom house would have been available for a family,
Right.
because so,
This
there's-
filtering idea.
yes, and then, like apartments, people come here for work. And there's no place for just to get an apartment for 6 months, not low income apartments, just workforce apartments,
Right.
whatever you want to call them. So it's definitely different sizes. And I heard a great presentation today from the city of Anacortes. Is that what I told you?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's excellent. I told them about it. So I'm wondering if maybe that could be part of our research is have that guy talk, because he talked about the different sizes they were trying to build. Not big, not big houses, but
Right.
because like we've got them, it's like we need to spread out the need, so.
The other thing is I look through this with a knothole,
Mhm.
right? I don't go to other ports, I don't live in other communities, I don't see the economic struggles necessarily besides just going through it, and why can't I go get a taco? Because the damn stores are shut, you can't hire anybody. Okay, other than that, I don't really know the ins and outs, so looking at from what you guys do on a regular basis. Communities like this, I mean, what is being done out other ports? What some of their ideas in some of the same. Apples to apples type situations that we may be facing that they've applied. And rather than recreating the wheel, so I'd be interested in some of that information to
Yes.
be able to plug into too.
I was just thinking that, I mean,
Yeah.
yes, I think that's phenomenal. It's definitely a best practice. This is something that came up in a strategic planning process that I did for a port on the west side last year. And I mean, I think it's just widely regarded as a really good thing to do. And especially with housing, no one has the answer. I can tell you, someone at the Port of Bellingham told me a few months ago, he thinks he spends 50% of his time trying to figure out housing. So, I mean, to be able to leverage, right?
It's very much in the port zeitgeist right now.
Very much.
Very much. There's lots of ports trying to figure this out.
That's it.
And it is not without controversy.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
So, anyway,
Right.
on that,
Lots of different approaches
yeah.
that we can gather.
On that note, we're a little over, so I want to make sure and respect your time.
Now we're paying you overtime.
Thank you.
No. Time at this table. We're just straight
It doesn't
time.
work that way.
No.
Thank you very much for your thoughts.
Did you get what you needed?
Yes, thank you.
I think
Now,
so.
hopefully it was value to you.
Very much. so.
Absolutely, no, I mean, and truly, I think there's a lot of value in coming and sitting face to face, right?
Yes.
So we will have the pleasure of seeing you again on February 8th. And we will be in touch with you, Jenny and Tracy before then about, what the shape of the workshop we think can and should look like.
Yep.
And
And community engagement implementation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's right. We gotta work on that.
Getting that going.
All right.
that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So much.
It is 8:09, so we'll adjourn this
Workshop.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, thank you. Oh, I had a question on this. Is it just this one?
Well, we're